When last did you go to a South African museum? And if you did you take your own dust cloth to make sure that the exhibits were free of dust so you could actually see what was there? Because we don't really have a good enough museum culture in South Africa, mostly because the museums are rubbish. Somebody who's looking to change that is a man called Michael Wolf. He runs, I don't know, an experiential company. I mean, that's really what it is, isn't it? A customer experience company. You'll do visitor centers for corporates, but you're also looking to shake up museums. Take me through it.
Absolutely. We're a specialized design consultancy called Formula D Interactive. We design customer visitor experiences, not only for museums, but museums is kind of where our heart is, because I mean that's where the big change needs to happen. But also corporate visitor centers, how do corporates tell their story? Every corporate has a history as well, and to find that identity and that kind of core, what the business is about, is often in telling that story about through an experiential experience.
I mean, if you look back a couple of hundred years and you go to Charles Darwin and you look at the samples he brought from all over the world, and he shook up the museum, World Natural History Museum in London, still has some of the stuff that he brought from Galapagos Islands, huge dinosaur exhibitions of bones and all of that sort of stuff in central London. But it kind of feels like when you go in there that you're stuck in Victorian times. It's fantastic, but is it good enough? Is it the future of museums?
No, I mean that's currently. I mean I just returned from a museum conference, Museum Next in Geneva, and that's currently the big thing that's discussed amongst the big museums as well, amongst the big players. What's the future of museums? And they for a very long time they sort of have been the powerhouses of very Eurocentric, of also colonial, very much representing colonial history. All these artifacts, they have been taken from some colonial
You go
places.
to the British Museum and you might as well be in Egypt, except Egypt doesn't have the good stuff anymore because it's all in the British Museum.
Absolutely.
So what is the idea then? I mean, one looks at museums and say, okay, they are great repositories of artifacts and there are elements of history captured there that you can see nowhere else. Brilliant, and that's useful. But into the future, they're going to have to compete more and more for our attention, because the world is, you look at what Google has done, for example, with Robben Island, and you can do a virtual tour of Robben Island. You don't need to go on the bumpy sea to get there. You don't need to get cold in the wind and get blinded by the dust. You can see Robben Island through Google. Robben Island's going to have to work a lot harder to get you there. So how do museums compete in the future where I can get the experience for no cost?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of points you're mentioning there, and the one is obviously always, you're comparing, and I think we're asking ourselves that question in everyday life as well. When is the point where we're all just completely immersed in this digital experience, and we, by the way, we're playing around with these immersive displays as well to use in museums. But on the other hand, one thing that is we're still blood and bone, and we still like to walk around and touch and feel things. But
museums won't let you.
That's the thing. So the visitor experience in generally is going towards a much more interactive, a much more experiential experience. Experiential experience. Okay, that's a
but experiencing the experience.
Which involves people a lot more, and the main key to this is storytelling. So we know museums as going something like you walk into an archive, okay, display 1, display 2, display 3, and then maybe the content is maybe gathered around certain topics. But what we're looking into is now how can we tell exciting stories around these artifacts? And you have an Egyptian vase, you can tell the story about colonial history, you can tell a story about the cultural archaeology aspects and so on. There's so many aspects to it, and we have to find, museums have to be flexible enough to change the stories around certain artifacts to address kind of the spirit of the time and get people involved, just like news as well. Like you have to tell good stories, you have to find the right angle into the story. And specifically in South Africa, there's so many interesting angles.
But museums will lose the plot. When I go into a museum, I see an artifact and I sit and Google information about the artifact because I'm not given anything that is nearly adequate enough, because I've actually got the power now. I can choose the version of the history that I want out of that artifact. Either I can find out about who carved the hieroglyphics into the artifact, or which colonial expedition found it, and whether or not there's going to be a battle over its future, and whether or not it'll go back to Egypt.
Yeah, absolutely. So a big point is personalization. So how can you make it a personalized experience? So people have from different backgrounds. We got different learning personalities. We like different things. We go in with a family. Museums are very much also catering around family experiences. So your program has to be suitable for your adults, but also for your kids. So now how can you personalize this experience? And digital media is one way of doing that.
Is South Africa really the place to do it? I mean, our museums are a travesty. They really are. We haven't yet worked out which version of our history we want to tell. We've got massive issues with heritage in South Africa right now. Perhaps it is a hotbed for museum innovation. Are you doing it for here, or are you doing this as something to export?
Well, we're doing it, we're starting from here, because I feel very much, that's my personal attitude as well. You learn by engaging with your surrounding, etc. And although we live in a global world, and we're doing business in the States, we're doing business in Europe as well. So, but we really at home here, and the themes, and it's also so exciting because I think this whole debate around heritage and what is to be memorized and what not is extremely exciting. And I would actually design experience around that. I would show various artifacts and maybe add by some means a layer of participation by the audience.
Because one goes, for example, just here in Cape Town, behind us, down below us, the Slave Lodge, for example, which is one of the most powerful museums. It's a post-1994 museum. And the power of the Slave Lodge is the stories. It's the human stories of people who came from all over the world against their will and were housed in Cape Town in that building. And you live and you breathe the air they breathed, and you feel it.
We have to be very much. We have to. That's why museums are so important. We got to realize that it's like merely 150 years ago, people were still sold on the marketplace, and these are kind of the stories that the opportunity of museums. Why museums are so important, and why we have to get people into museums through making the experiences also more exciting, more attractive for people to come. But we kind of source our identities, and there's been a lot of debate. What is the role of museums in
who should own museums? There's an interesting one for you. Should museums be profit-generating businesses that make them the experience so worthwhile that you have to go there to get that experience, or should the state be in charge and let them run as they have been? Because then who defines the narrative?
Essentially museums, there's probably not one museum in the world that is self-sustainable, that just gets, so there we have to find a line between Disney World, where it's purely entertainment and where you got free run. So, and obviously not saying that we can't create really enjoyable, attractive experiences around heritage content, but there is still, I think that from a funding perspective, but also from, I believe this should definitely remain in the public domain, because we see a trend in our world is that things get more privatized, and you look at public space and the same thing happens. So we kind of, it feels to me, we need those spaces where people can come together, look at heritage, and which has been sort of through a curatorial process, but also through some sort of democratic process, has come to be exhibited there, and we use those spaces as spaces for debate as well.
No, but that's it. It's about interactive. If you don't leave a museum feeling something, then it's a little bit like going to look at the Mona Lisa and walking away going, "Yeah, I've seen a picture of it before." If you're not moved by it, then the museum's not done its job.
Exactly. There's lots of really exciting from a technology side.
Which is the best museum in the world right now?
Best museum in the world. Good point.
Who's really getting it? Who's marrying technology with experience, and is actually, when people go in and leave, their minds are blown completely. They're different when they come out.
Yeah. A lot of talk about is the Cooper Hewitt in Cleveland. design museum, which has some fascinating concepts of how people interacting with the exhibit. They, for instance, they're searching an archive. I mean, this is about design now. So this is about design, and the interaction designers here. They really thought some interesting concepts. That people draw a shape on a touch screen, and the shape is being analyzed. Looks in the archive for objects that have that sort of shape, and then it brings out these shapes and allows people to design themselves according to certain templates and so on. So it's highly interactive, and it also brings in digital devices. So in terms of sort of cutting edge, visitor experience using technology, that would be a good example.
Okay, so but that is specific to, and that's sort of advancing people. But in terms of, I mean, most museums are dusty old bones and historical artifacts. I mean, I like the, if you go into Washington, D.C., for example, and you see real life artifacts. I mean, there you see the Wright brothers, the Wright Flyer, and you see the Spirit of St. Louis. These are real artifacts. These are, there's no replacing that.
No.
But you can enhance it.
Yeah, absolutely. You also probably know that most big parts of the museum are, under earth in the archives. The museum never has, they don't have the floor space to display everything and the attention to detail. But sometimes it's not only about the big artifacts. Obviously, these are major draw cards. If you have a big big art objects, etc. But let's look at the District 6 Museum in Cape Town. It's been quite some time. It's been built. It's been there for a long time, but it has definitely it somehow manages to tell the story of District 6 quite beautifully. So it is still a living space because the community element attached to it. Although there's hardly any technology used, and we'd be very excited to get involved in upgrading this museum.
Absolutely. I mean, the Apartheid Museum is another one. I mean, look at Robert Mugabe's response when he came out of the Apartheid Museum, and it evoked precisely the sort of response that you would hope it would evoke. It evokes disappointment and anger and rage at an inhumane system. I mean, it's been very cleverly structured, but that was private money. I mean, that was part of the deal to build Gold Reef City was you fund the creation of this museum. It's independently curated, but you fund it. Surely that's the future, where you have, okay, you want to have a casino, well then you need to do a District 6 museum if it's in Cape Town, or you need to do whatever the appropriate museum is in an area. Surely that's a way to get museum funding going?
It makes sense to have it as basically run by an independent, non-governmental entity. Just because there's so many things changing in government and funding changes, etc. So if you want to build a sustainable institution, then it would make sense to look into that, to have it more also sustainable through private funding.
But it's about technology. It's about being interactive, and mostly it's about storytelling. If we don't get the storytelling right, we're doomed, right?
Exactly.
Michael Wolff, nice to see you. Thanks very much for coming in. Michael Wolff,
thank you,
is an innovative guy. He is based in South Africa, and he's looking to take the museum world by storm. Michael Wolff this evening on Tonight with Bruce Whitfield. There'll be more tonight tomorrow. Till then, goodbye.